The sinister truth behind Lizzie Borden. She wasn't alone with the axe. That haunting children's rhyme, sung in schoolyards for over a century, tells us a young woman who struck her parents down in cold blood. But what if the song only tells half the story? What if the truth buried beneath the nursery rhyme is far darker than anyone dared to admit? Tonight, we peel back the veil of myth and step into a world of suspicion, secrecy, and acts that may have been wielded by more than one pair of hands. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. More forgotten tales and hidden truths are coming, and you won't want to miss them. In the summer of 1892, in a quiet New England home, two bodies were found hacked beyond recognition. At the center of the storm stood Lizzie Borden, a daughter with everything to lose and nothing to hide. The trial that followed shocked America, leaving behind questions that have never been fully answered. And as we unravel the story, you'll soon see why Lizzie's name was never meant to stand alone. The story of Lizzie Borden begins, for most people, with a rhyme. Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. It is playful in rhythm, almost sing-song, but behind the childlike cadence lies one of the most brutal crimes in American memory. Generations of children learned her name not from history books, but from a chilling verse passed along like a ghost story at the edge of a playground. The rhyme paints Lizzie as a villain, the cold daughter who brought down the axe on her parents, leaving their homes soaked in blood. But like all rhymes, its neat simplicity hides something far more complex, and perhaps far more sinister. In this simplified tale, Lizzie is remembered as the embodiment of rage contained within a genteel young woman. Newspapers in the early 20th century fueled the image of her as a monster in petticoats, an icon of hidden violence. Stories of her cold demeanor and lack of tears during her trial only strengthened this picture. The rhyme, repeated endlessly, became her curse, reducing a life of shadows and secrets into one grisly act. Yet even here we should ask, who wrote this rhyme, and why did it survive when so many other ballads of the era disappeared into silence? The most popular retelling leaves no room for doubt. Lizzie is guilty. The rhyme condemns her in rhyme and meter, making her guilt seem like an undeniable fact. Parents would recite it as a warning, children as a game, and the American imagination embraced the idea of a daughter who turned into a murderer. But history is rarely so clean. Crimes as bloody leave more than just a rhyme behind. They leave contradictions, hidden testimonies, and silences that refuse to be explained. The neatness of the children's song almost feels like a cover, a way of simplifying a nightmare into something people could repeat without choking on the horror. Even today, if you ask a passerby who Lizzie Borden was, most will answer with a rhyme. Few know the details of her life, the circumstances of her family, or the tensions boiling inside her home. Fewer still know that the rhyme itself is factually wrong. Her stepmother received far fewer than 40 blows, and her father fewer still. The rhyme exaggerates, distorts, and dramatizes. But myths are not built on truth. They are built on what people want to remember or what someone wanted us to believe. And in Lizzie's case, the myth overshadowed the real story almost immediately. This popular version, repeated so many times, became not just a story but a sentence. Lizzie could never escape it, even after her acquittal. Her name was forever chained to the axe, to the nursery rhyme, to the myth. But here lies the first twist. The rhyme does not mention where she truly was when the murders occurred, or the inconsistencies in the witnesses' testimonies. It leaves out the evidence that went missing, the family's secrets whispered behind locked doors, and the neighbors who told a different tale. The rhyme is not a record of guilt. It is a mask, and the truth waits just behind it. In the late 19th century, Fall River, Massachusetts, was a place of sharp contrasts. Immigrant workers crowded into textile mills, while old Yankee families like the Bordens guarded their money and reputation with iron fists. Respectability was currency, and appearances mattered more than affection. Andrew Borden, Lizzie's father, was one of the wealthiest men in town, but he lived with notorious frugality. The house where Lizzie grew up was plain, without indoor plumbing, despite their fortune. For a young woman expected to maintain social standing, this kind of life felt suffocating. And inside the Borden household, tension was the air they breathed. Lizzie's mother had died when she was a child, and her father remarried Abby Durfee Gray. To the neighbors, Abby was simply the stepmother, a figure treated with cold civility by both Lizzie and her sister, Emma. Rumors of inheritance disputes swirled. Andrew was known to transfer properties into Abby's name, sparking resentment among his daughters. The house was not a warm home, but a battleground of wills and whispered grievances. In a society where women had little power, control over inheritance could mean everything. And in that house on 2nd Street, love seemed to be the only thing in short supply. Beyond the Borden walls, the town itself seemed to carry secrets. Neighbors whispered that Andrew Borden had enemies, men cheated in business, families crushed by his financial decisions. Others claimed that strange visitors had been seen around the house days before the murders. Fall River was a place of gossip, and every whispered suspicion seemed to find its way into the story. The atmosphere of the time was thick with distrust, and when the murders happened, many were quick to think the axe might have been swung by someone with a grudge against a family. But somehow, all suspicion turned inward to Lizzie. New England culture in the 1890s carried a strict moral code. Women were expected to be modest, dutiful, and silent, while men held financial and social power. Lizzie, however, had joined church groups, was outspoken, and often traveled alone, behavior that raised eyebrows. To some, she was seen as strong-willed, to others, dangerously unconventional. When the murders happened, this cultural lens colored how people saw her. Could a proper lady wield an axe with such violence? Or did her very refusal to conform make her the perfect scapegoat? Society was not just watching Lizzie. It was ready to condemn her for not fitting the mold. And here lies the twist. The popular rhyme blames Lizzie entirely, but the culture around her shaped that narrative. The town needed a villain to ease its fear, and who better than the daughter who never seemed to bend to rules? Yet, testimony suggests she was not the only one in the house that day. Others reported strange noises, shadows moving, and doors left open. What if Fall River's strict society didn't just judge Lizzie, but also buried other names, other possibilities? The rhyme gave us certainty, but the town itself was filled with doubt. On the morning of August 4th, 1892, the Borden house was heavy with silence. Emma, Lizzie's older sister, was away. Bridget Sullivan, the maid, had been ordered to clean in the stifling heat despite being ill. Andrew left for his usual morning errands, while Abby stayed behind. By late morning, neighbors heard screams. Abby was found upstairs, face down, her skull cleaved by repeated blows. Hours later, Andrew returned home and lay down on a couch. Minutes later, he too was discovered, his face unrecognizable, shattered by the axe. The neat, respectable Borden house had become a scene of horror, soaked in blood and shadow. Lizzie claimed she had been in the barn searching for lead sinkers to go fishing. She said she knew nothing until Bridget's screams echoed through the house. But questions arose immediately. How had she not heard the thud of the axe, the cries, or the chaos? Witnesses reported seeing her burn a dress days later, claiming it was stained with paint. The prosecution seized on this, painting Lizzie as calculating and cold. Yet inconsistencies plagued the case. The murder weapon was never firmly identified. Blood evidence was inconclusive. Some neighbors swore they saw strangers near the house. The neat conviction the rhyme promised began to unravel. The trial that followed captivated the nation. Newspapers described Lizzie as both a monster and a saint, their headlines swinging between condemnation and defense. Inside the courtroom, Lizzie fainted dramatically when her father's skull was presented as evidence. Some saw this as guilt manifesting, others as the shock of a daughter confronted with brutality. Witnesses contradicted one another. Bridget testified reluctantly, clearly afraid. The defense argued that no blood was found on Lizzie's clothing, and that she lacked the strength to deliver such savage blows. The jury was left not with certainty, but with chaos. On June 20th, 1893, Lizzie Borden was acquitted. She walked free, her head bowed, her reputation shattered. Outside, the crowd split between those who jeered and those who cheered. For some, justice had failed. For others, it had been served. But even in freedom, Lizzie became a prisoner of her own legend. The rhyme outlived the verdict, turning her into a symbol of horror regardless of the law's decision. Yet beneath this, one question lingered. Could she truly have done it alone? Testimony suggested footsteps, noises, and perhaps even accomplices that the trial never fully addressed. Here is the most chilling twist. Certain testimonies were quietly dismissed, certain leads never pursued. Bridget once hinted she believed others knew more than they revealed. Neighbors whispered about tensions with business rivals. And yet, history remembers only Lizzie. The rhyme erased the complexities, the shadows, the silences. If Lizzie Borden held the axe, was she the hand that swung it, or the scapegoat for a truth too dangerous to name? That unanswered question still haunts every retelling, pulling us deeper into the darkness of what really happened in that house. The Lizzie Borden rhyme is more than a playground chant. It is propaganda disguised as a nursery song. Its rhythm made it unforgettable, its simplicity made it repeatable, and its distortion of facts made it effective. It reduced a complicated crime into a morality tale, a daughter turned into a monster. But why did this rhyme survive when countless others disappeared? Its survival suggests intention, almost as if society needed Lizzie to remain guilty in collective imagination. By making her the villain, the rhyme preserved order. Women were warned, children were entertained, and the community was reassured that evil had a face they could point to. The axe itself became a symbol of repressed violence, of fractures within a family that could no longer be contained. Andrew's cold rigidity, Abby's contested inheritance, Lizzie's simmering frustrations, all of it condensed into the image of a blade. Yet in the cultural retelling, the axe became Lizzie's alone, stripping the story of its context. Psychologically, it mirrors how society often simplifies female anger, either dismissed entirely or exaggerated into monstrosity. Lizzie became the embodiment of that fear, her silence after acquittal interpreted as guilt rather than exhaustion from carrying an unbearable accusation. Silence itself plays a haunting role. Lizzie never testified in her own defense, and her refusal to explain left a void that others filled with suspicion. But silence can mean many things: protection, resistance, or even knowledge of something unspeakable. Bridget's silences on the stand, the missing testimonies, the erased rumors, all became part of the void. And in that silence, myths thrived. The community's eagerness to condemn Lizzie without proof reflects a cultural pattern. It is easier to let a woman carry the burden of guilt than to face the shadows lurking in the wider society. The psychological symbolism of the case echoes modern themes. The rhyme shows how narratives can be weaponized, shaping memory for generations. The axe shows how suppressed tensions eventually erupt, often violently. The silence shows how truth can be erased, reshaped, or hidden when too dangerous to confront. Lizzie's story, therefore, is not only about a crime, but about how culture processes trauma, blame, and fear. Every symbol in her tale speaks louder than the verdict itself. And perhaps that is why the legend endures, not because it answers questions, but because it refuses to. Here lies the final twist before the conclusion. What if Lizzie's story was never about her guilt or innocence, but about society's need for a monster? By focusing on her, the rhyme erased the whispers of accomplices, the rivalries that surrounded Andrew, and the possibility of secrets too scandalous for courtroom. In condemning Lizzie, Fall River silenced its own darkness. The myth became a mirror, reflecting less about Lizzie and more about us, our hunger for simple villains, our fear of complexity, and our willingness to believe the story that feels safest, even if it is a lie. Lizzie Borden's story is not only the tale of a crime, but the creation of a cultural ghost. Whether guilty or innocent, she was transformed into something larger than life, a cautionary figure, a whispered name, a rhyme that crossed generations. The truth of that August morning was lost beneath layers of fear, gossip, and silence. What remained was a legend sharpened by suspicion, polished by rhyme, and sealed into the American psyche. In the end, Lizzie did not just live in Fall River. She became Fall River's eternal shadow. Her case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. How much of what we know about history is shaped not by facts, but by stories designed to control memory? Lizzie's name survived not because the courts found her guilty, but because a rhyme made her guilt irresistible to believe. The trial ended in acquittal, but public opinion never acquitted her. The rhyme sentenced her to eternal infamy. It is a reminder that sometimes legends are stronger than verdicts, and that once a story is weaponized, it cannot easily be undone. There's also something deeply human in the way Lizzie's silence echoes across time. For some, it screams guilt. For others, it whispers survival. Perhaps Lizzie knew more than she ever revealed. Perhaps she was shielding herself from a society ready to devour her. Or perhaps, as some suspect, she was protecting someone else entirely. The silence invites endless interpretation, and maybe that is why the story has never faded. A definitive answer would end the mystery, but ambiguity keeps the legend alive. What Lizzie Borden ultimately represents is not simply a daughter accused of parricide, but a mirror to our collective fears. We fear the collapse of the family. We fear hidden violence behind closed doors, and we fear the unsettling truth that innocence and guilt can blur beyond recognition. Lizzie became the vessel for those fears, and in condemning her, society found a way to silence them. But the axe still hangs in the shadows, reminding us that the story was never truly resolved. And so we are left with the most haunting question of all. Was Lizzie Borden truly alone with the axe, or was she carrying the weight of someone else's secret? That uncertainty is the beating heart of her legend. It is why we still whisper her name, why the rhyme is still sung, and why the truth continues to elude us. If you want to uncover more hidden stories like this, the myths, the lies, and the truths buried beneath them, subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts below. More revelations are on the way, and you won't want to miss what we uncover next.